Today's episode is sponsored by 4Days. They're one of our favorite closed-loop sustainable clothing brands. Our favorite product of theirs is the Take Back bag. You just fill it up with clothes in any condition from any brand, send it back with the prepaid shipping label, and get an instant credit. They work with partners to recycle, downcycle, and upcycle what you send in. All those clothes you can't donate or resell, this is how you keep them out of landfills, save water, and prevent a ton of CO2 emissions. Pretty neat.
If you think global warming is bad, just listen to this. The global referral rate for businesses is only 2.3%. Yikes! Luckily, Thumbs Up is here to change that. Thumbs Up is a referral system designed to help businesses leverage their customers' social media with almost no hassle. With Thumbs Up, you can create a personalized post for your customer, allowing them to celebrate their new purchase or service while endorsing your business to all their connections. Thumbs Up, referrals without asking.
All right, Definers, welcome back to Sustainability Defined, where Scott and I are here defining sustainability, one topic and one bad joke at a time. This is episode 62 on transit-oriented development. Scott, how excited are we for
We're
this?
excited. I can barely sit still.
All right, well, we'll channel that squirmy energy into what the outline for this episode looks like.
All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about, Jay, is what is transit-oriented development, or TOD, or TOD? I'm not sure, but we're going to intermix all that because we say TOD too much to say the same thing. What is the history of TOD? Why is TOD important? How can cities, even car-dominated ones, promote TOD? Who are the leaders in the TOD space? And about our guest, Rick Cole. All right, Jay, so what is transit-oriented development, TOD, or TOD?
So, Scott, transit-oriented development, also known as TOD, TOD, or TOD, is defined as the creation of compact, walkable, pedestrian-oriented, mixed-use communities centered around high-quality train systems. This definition comes from the TOD Institute, the leading national planning organization working to promote and accelerate the rollout of walkable, mixed-use communities around rail stations. Compared to today's current developments that primarily rely on cars, TOD creates walkable communities that greatly reduce the need for driving and energy consumption by emphasizing alternative means of mobility.
And Jay, I know we've got a lot of cool examples throughout this episode, but certainly one that can just be sort of like the lead example maybe is Washington, D.C. and its surrounding area, which I know you and I have connections to. And it's seen as a good example of TOD because it has this highly diverse mix of uses that surround the region's metro stops, running around D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. And they cover everything from office, retail, hotel, and residential uses with easy walking distance from station stops. And I can speak to that personally, near the U Street stop. I was thinking about this today, actually. I'm so close to like CVS and the grocery store and restaurants, everything I can walk to.
And it's all right there. And DC is just such a, like, to me, it's got just a perfect, like, human scale city. You know, nothing's too domineering.
No, and the sidewalks are wide, so we can walk everywhere. And the neighborhoods have distinct characters, but I can walk to all these different ones. So
and when you can't walk, you can ride.
And I can ride my bike everywhere. So the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, it actually goes a step further than TOD Institute's definition that you mentioned, Jay, because it has additional themes beyond just the built environment. It defines TOD as inclusive access for all to local and citywide opportunities and resources by the most efficient and healthful combination of mobility modes at the lowest financial and environmental cost and with the highest resilience to disruptive events. I like that resilience bit in there. That's important too.
Totally. TOD focuses on a variety of components to cultivate vibrant, livable, and sustainable communities. A few examples cited from the TOD Institute or the TOD Best Practices Handbook include creating a walkable, focused design through non-motorized infrastructure with pedestrians as the main priority. One example here is downtown pedestrian malls that don't allow cars, like the many we've seen pop up in the wake of COVID as places capitalize on outdoor space. So, Scott, this makes me think of thinking locally here in Denver, Boulder's Pearl Street is this pedestrian mall that has never allowed cars. But then recently, Anna and I went back to visit San Francisco, and in all of these former curbs where parking spaces used to be, all these things called parklets have popped up where businesses have basically expanded these kind of cool wooden structures to add to their outdoor dining capacity.
Oh,
and
yeah. We have those in DC too. So they're like decks, Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think that's, when you look at that in a street that does that, it's so clear that prioritizes people over cars. And I think that really helps lend to just this more inviting environment. So that was one example. A second example from these two resources is highlighting and encouraging sustainable transportation alternatives like light rail systems, trains, high-capacity bus lines, and the dedicated bike paths that we are sure that you use in DC, Scott.
Yeah, and I just want to say, Jay, with the restaurant thing, what's also interesting there is that I think it also helps the restaurants, too. And then you're helping local businesses, and we're going to talk more about helping the regional economy later. And the other example I want to give is I was just in Italy, and Bologna, Italy, had this wonderful pedestrian-oriented, very long street. And it really was just so lively, when you have people just milling about the street. It's awesome.
Buon appetito.
Yeah, prego. All right. So the third example, Jay, from these resources is having a train station as a prominent feature of the town center. An example is Union Station in Denver, Colorado, which itself has been retrofitted with many cool bars and eateries, but also is located at the convergence of lower downtown, Denver's increasingly expansive light rail lines, and citywide bus routes. So, Jay, when it says retrofitted here, was it not like that? It didn't have hip restaurants before or something?
It's actually the result of a really cool redevelopment that completely redid the inside of the station. It's got a hotel now and all these kind of hip, cool spots, and has honestly, in my opinion, kind of slowly become the new nucleus of the city. It's been that successful.
Do people sometimes go and they don't even have to go on a train? They just go because that's a cool place to be?
Oh, totally. A lot of people stay there just for fun. We'll do happy hours and drinks there. It's just an extremely successful example of this stuff.
Wow. Okay. So a fourth example is ensuring livable, beautified, and high-density living spaces with the integration of green spaces. And Jay, I want to tell the listeners if they want to understand green spaces in urban areas. We've got an episode on that, episode 51 on urban greening.
I'll say, Scott, that episode turned out to be way more popular than I had anticipated. Nothing against the concept of urban greening, but wow, nice payoff. Mm-hmm. All right. So generally speaking, as we zoom out, the demand for walkable and sustainable communities is on the rise. Half of the respondents to an Urban Land Institute survey in 2015 said that walkability is either the top priority or a high priority when deciding where they want to live. 52% of the respondents said they want to live where they don't need to use a car so often.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that the unique developmental components of TOD provide many benefits to local communities and present a viable solution to mitigating cities' impact on climate change, which we will dive into later in the episode. All right, Jay, so what is the history of toad?
Toads started as amphibious creatures.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, wrong episode. Uh-huh. All right, the idea of having a transportation-oriented city is nothing new, of course, as the introduction of transportation was a key catalyst in the Industrial Revolution here in the U.S. And some even say that toad is the modern branding of an old concept. To paint a picture for all you listeners, before 1916, the U.S. was the world's leader in transit rail miles, streetcar ridership, and almost every other transit metric, with 254,000 miles of railway track covering the country. In 1890, New York, Chicago, Boston, and Philadelphia each had 2 to 3 times more per capita transit trips than did London.
And Jay, this reminds me of episode 43 that we did on high-speed rail, where we were talking about how the U.S. is behind when it comes to high-speed rail, like to the likes of Japan and Italy and China. And I'm going to bring up my Italy trip again. I took high-speed rail from Rome to Florence and Venice and Bologna. Mm-hmm. So it's stunning to think about how we were so far ahead and now we're so far behind.
Well, and actually, Scott, to continue on that, what was kind of so bittersweet living in San Francisco is that they've got I think it's called the F line is one of their Muni lines. It's basically a light rail like trolley system that works in the city, but it's kind of like an iconic route because it goes right down Market Street and along the waterfront. And what's cool about it is that all of the rail cars they use are old refurbished rail cars from other cities across the country. So you can look and say, okay, this one's colored, differently. Oh, and you look closely, it says Chicago on it. That one's LA or Boston. You're like, oh, this is so cool that they like recaptured all these train cars and are reusing them. But it's also like, well, damn, like all these cities had this infrastructure built out that went defunct for some of the reasons, Scott, you're about to touch on. And it is a little bit tough. It's like, well, that kind of sucks. We were such a leader, and then, this revolution around the automobile happened, and we haven't like fully recovered.
No. And I think the infrastructure bill that's being discussed right now could help a bit. And we don't need to dive into politics right now, but yeah, we're behind. So let's still keep on the line of positive things that were happening. So suburbs were once connected via streetcars through a system conversely called development-oriented transit. So this is where private developers built transit to benefit their developments rather than centering developments around transit systems. So it was still good because they were getting the transit out to where they were building. And the streetcar stops, they were accompanied by small clusters of shops, and we are a clear precursor to modern-day transit-oriented development. Now, this is where things start to turn. The invention of the automobile in the early 1900s, it was the start of the deteriorating relationship between housing, jobs, and transit. Specifically, after major disinvestment in public transit during the Depression and World War II, in 1945, we had this development of the Eisenhower interstate system in 1956. Amazing feat of engineering, but automobiles, they became the most popular use of transportation, and the number of cars per capita doubled in the U.S. by 1950 as compared to 1925.
So even with the implementation of transit within developments not being a new strategy here in the U.S., the battle of integrating this development in a contrasting car-oriented society is a relatively new obstacle we face. Today's idea of transit-oriented development was mainly developed in the 1990s by Peter Calthorpe, a prominent urban planner and architect we'll reference later in the show. The concept has since gained steam and found itself in today's policy developments at the federal and state levels, starting in 2009 when the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the Environmental Protection Agency formed a partnership for sustainable communities. At the state level, according to a 2012 report, statutes in at least 22 states support TOD in some manner, whether that be having bus rapid transit systems or new intensive TOD build-out.
This is a pretty recent term, huh, Jay? 90s?
Yeah, really not that long.
Yeah. And he's still alive, Peter.
The man is still alive. We could not snag him for the expert guest interview.
That's
for
all
the
right.
show,
We got Rick Cole.
But we've got a man by the name of Mr. Cole who I think carries plenty of weight.
All right. So why is TOD important, Jay? Well, access to sustainable transportation options, increasing walkability within neighborhoods, and minimizing urban sprawl can have an enormous impact on a city's ability to fight climate change as well as cultivating higher standards of well-being. The list could go on, but the Center for Transit-Oriented Development, or CTOD, highlights 4 distinct benefits of TOD, including reducing greenhouse gas emissions, strengthening the regional economy, increasing inclusive job access, and 4th, helping make the most out of public investments. Let's do what we do best, Jay, and break those down.
Number 1, reducing overall greenhouse gas emissions for cities and individuals. When it comes to reducing greenhouse gas or GHG emissions, by concentrating jobs, services, and housing with an accessible transit nearby, people don't have to rely on using a car to get around. GHG emissions from transportation account for 29% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, making it the largest contributor of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Interestingly, a 2021 study in Indonesia centering on urbanization and economic growth found that the overall impact of greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced by 36%, respiratory impacts by 8%, and smog by 25% through the proper planning of transportation and buildings.
You'd almost think it'd be more, huh, Jay?
Almost.
But I also like that it's not just emissions, that there's this public health, air quality component.
Yeah, at least it's like one of the studies we found that directly connects all that stuff to the built environment, which is really kind of nice.
Yeah.
So that's number one as far as distinct benefits of TOD. Here's number two, strengthening the regional economy. The nonprofit organization CEOs for Cities estimates that the 2 million people who live in Portland, Oregon region save a total of $1.1 billion, or roughly $550 per person per year, by commuting 4 fewer miles per day than the national average of 24.3 miles. The money saved by not having a car or spending money on gas can be spent in restaurants, local businesses, or other purchases that have a multiplier effect on the local economy.
$550 per person per year. That's really intense. That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. Scott, what's the first thing you would do with an extra $550?
I'd probably spoil my cat.
That is a lucky cat.
No, I'd spoil my partner.
There we go.
And buy her more flowers. That's a better answer.
That's a great answer, actually. Maybe Keaton, we can edit that to make Shannon none the wiser, but nothing against you, Delta.
Yeah, right. Okay. So number 3, increasing inclusive job access. So TOAD has the opportunity to increase access for all kinds of jobs. According to CTOD demand estimates, more than 40% of future demand for housing near transit will come from households earning less than 80% of area median income. CTOD suggests that TOD can prevent gentrification by prioritizing moderate and low-income families in their accessible housing and job accessibility plans to create an inclusive community for everyone. So it's interesting, Jay, that on the one hand we're saying that a lot of the demand for the housing near transit will be from low-income families, and yet there's gentrification happening and the values of that housing is going up. So I wonder if the low-income families, they're going to want this housing because it's closer to transit, more job opportunities, but maybe they're going to be pushed out, and that's really sad. So it's more important to plan for that, but still.
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance, I think, from a city planning perspective that's going to be probably unique to each city and perhaps even each station.
Yeah. Okay, and the fourth benefit of TOD is helping make the most out of public investments. Successful TOD leads to higher transit ridership, which means more revenue from fares. TOD also supports more walk and ride transit trips, which can be cheaper for transit agencies over time than building, maintaining, and operating parking. All right, Jay, so how can cities, even car-dominated ones, promote TOD?
A fantastic question, Scott.
Thank you.
The C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, a network of the world's megacities committed to addressing climate change, introduced a plan in 2019 to help cities implement transit-oriented development at the local level. Within their plan, they highlight several steps a city can take to integrate TOD successfully. Let's dive into 4 of their recommendations and how cities have used these to implement TOD.
Okay, so the first recommendation is establish a long-term, city-owned, and citywide vision for TOAD. By adding TOAD language and policy recommendations within a city's... is it going to get old, Jay? I'm not sure.
TOAD language, I'm thinking like ribbit, and I know that's not necessarily instructive from a planning perspective.
I don't think we've killed it yet, but listeners, let us know how we're doing. Okay, by adding TOD language and policy recommendations within a city's comprehensive urban development plans and inviting widespread participation in TOD's progress, TOD may be more likely to gain traction and support. In Portland, Oregon's Portland Plan, their strategic proposal towards a prosperous, educated, healthy, and equitable city, citizen participation was key. Consultations attracted more than 20,000 comments and ideas from citizens that helped city officials form educated policy recommendations that reflected the needs of community members. And I think, Jay, we heard this in the Equity in Cities episode. I feel like we got stories from our guests there talking about the need for comments and engaging local citizens on that.
For sure. Okay, second recommendation we have is measure access to transit and consider setting city targets. Setting TOAD-focused targets can send a clear signal to citizens and developers about the importance of sustainable urban design, as well as keep local governments accountable for their promises. TOD-focused targets can either be represented as a percentage of new development within a certain radius of transit stations, a percentage of the population living in TOD zones, or a percentage of the population with access to public transport. New York City, for example, aims for 95% of new housing to be built within a half mile of mass transit locations as a part of their Plan NYC sustainability plan. Additionally, Los Angeles, admittedly not as dense as New York, has solidified incremental TOD targets within their sustainability plan. By 2025, LA aims to have 57% of all new housing units be developed within 1,500 feet of transit and 75% by 2035.
All right, I have several questions, Jay. First of all, within a half mile of mass transit locations, do you think that includes bus stations?
I venture to say yes.
Because if so, I challenge someone to find a space in New York City that's not within a half mile of something.
Listeners in New York prove us wrong.
Yeah, and then I like how this Los Angeles sustainability plan is P, capital A, capital A, N. I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
Pronounced plan.
Yeah. Also, their 2025 goal, I like how it's 57%. It's like we did some serious math, and that's
right.
That's the best we can do.
Within 1,500 feet and not 1 foot more.
All right. So number 3 of these recommendations to implement TOD is identify where to apply TOD in the appropriate density and development mix. It's important to note that TOD cannot be applied everywhere and anywhere. So, this 95% number, New York City can do it, but, rural town can't, of course.
Topeka, Kansas?
I consciously didn't choose a place to name to pick on anyone, but okay, Topeka, Kansas. Why are we picking on Topeka?
Well, I just feel like, it's just the first city that came to mind, and I think they would readily admit that they're not New York, right?
Yeah, but of all the not New York places, why Topeka?
I don't know. Sorry, right. Topekans.
Yeah, geez. Okay. I love you, Topeka. Send hate mail to Jay, okay? Let's see, back on track. So the densities of jobs and residents vary across the U.S. and globe, so finding target areas where TOD can thrive is crucial. C40 highlights the World Bank's 3 values, or 3V, TOD guide as a helpful outline for identifying appropriate target locations. These 3 values include node value, which is the current passenger traffic and transportation use, place value, the quality and attractiveness of the area around the station, and 3, market potential value, financial value of space that could be developed in a target location.
All right, the 4th and final recommendation is to update regulations to align land use and planning regulations with transit strategies. So collaboration between transportation and planning departments is crucial when creating a successful TOD strategy. In order to make TOD possible, C40 highlights 2 different core land use and planning regulation updates. These are, number 1, upzoning, also known as rezoning for denser development. It helps by lifting common restrictions on land use so that more modest, affordable choices are allowed. A great example of successful upzoning is when Minneapolis became the first major American city to eliminate single-family zoning, which is a land use law that allows for the development of single-family homes, often associated with urban sprawl. That happened in 2018.
So eliminate single-family zoning. I mean, they must still allow single-family homes still, but maybe they allow just other types of things now?
Right. I think what they've basically done is kind of just raised the floor, Scott, so that, I'm sure single-family development is still possible, but they've also enabled on a citywide basis units like duplexes and triplexes as a way to build more densely in residential areas.
Right. So it's not like someone can say, well, in this part of Minneapolis, it's only single-family homes now. It's like, nah, we got rid of that. You can't just make an area where only single-family homes are allowed.
Exactly.
All right, cool.
So the second land use regulation tool here is a shift to mixed use zoning in the area near transit hubs. So this allows for a complementary mix of residential, commercial, and even industrial uses in a single district. So Scott, I'm thinking back to all the metro stops in DC where you've got all these different uses, a nice healthy mix that helps encourage TOD.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising that they weren't allowing that before almost, it's like a duh.
Yeah, totally. It's just kind of antiquated planning. I remember studying this. There was a period in urban planning where planners like to have clearly defined boundaries. Like, this is your industrial zone. This is your commercial zone. This is your residential zone. And tried it. Turns out didn't really work that well. And so now we're seeing this push back towards the mixed use stuff that we all have come to understand now is creating more vibrant places.
Yeah, but I also think about like Houston, where there's like no zoning, and then things are crazy. So there's maybe a middle ground of sorts, but certainly around the transit hubs, mixed use makes sense.
That's right, Scott. And really together, these zoning tactics can help align land use and planning regulation with TOD strategies to help build them out.
Okay, Jay, so who are the leaders in the TOD space besides Jay Siegel? Well, when it comes to leaders in TOD expansion, many cities, developers, and design firms have taken the lead. First, we'll recall the several organizations we've already mentioned in the episode: Urban Land Institute, C40, and CTOD.
I see Todd.
You see Todd? That's good.
Do you see Todd?
No, I'm having a bit of trouble seeing Todd. One day. So one example of a city that has gone above and beyond to successfully integrate TOD would be Portland, Oregon. And there's like a reveal there. I don't know if the listeners were guessing. But by 2040...
And they were like, obviously it's Portland, Scott.
It's definitely Portland. So by 2040, Portland plans for 40% of households and nearly 70% of jobs to be located in or near centers of corridors served by public transit. The World Wildlife Fund reported that Portland's residents are twice as likely to use public transportation for work commuting, travel 20% less distance per day, and are 7 times more likely to bicycle to work than the average U.S. city dweller thanks to Portland's TOD intentional projects and activities. So they're saving money, they're saving time, Jay. Portland residents kind of living the dream a little bit.
Have you ever been to Portland, Scott?
Yeah, they have the Simpson street names and Voodoo Donuts.
I think I knew about the Voodoo Donuts, not the Simpson street names, but
yeah,
I've never been there, and like this episode is, if anything else, I'm walking away with, you got to visit Portland.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Denver, Colorado, here in my backyard, is another city that has been a longtime leader in TOD. Since 2005, 68% of all new offices and 44% of all new housing in Metro Denver has been located within 1/2 mile of a regional transportation district or RTD station. But it's not all positive news here in the Mile High City. According to a blog post from Naomi Amaha of the Denver Foundation, nearly 3 out of 4 Denverites still drive alone to work, and Denver has one of the highest single occupancy vehicle commute rates in the nation at 73%. Sounds like we've got a whole city that needs to listen to this episode.
Oh, yeah.
Many developers and design firms have also made their mark on the TOD world, branching off of just cities and organizations. Any urban planner will know the names of Peter Calthorpe and Andres Duwani, 2 famous architects that helped popularize facets of TOD via the Congress for the New Urbanism, which is a well-known nonprofit organization whose mission is to champion walkable urbanism. More on that in approximately 15 seconds.
Well, Jay, let me first ask quickly. These 2 names, Peter Calthorpe and Andres Duwani, did they come up in your studies?
Oh, yeah. These guys are kind of just those visionary planning thinkers that kind of rolled up concepts of TOD and other walkability into a kind of like a guidebook of how to do it. And so what's actually really interesting, are you familiar with the town of Seaside in Florida, Scott?
No.
I think it's one of the earliest examples of like a master planned new urbanist community, which means it's like a large scale new urbanist, meaning it's accessible via transit, it's walkable city in America that's done extremely well.
Seaside, Florida.
Seaside, Florida.
Huh. Okay, sounds nice. Okay.
Seaside, not to be confused with Todd.
Okay, so Jay, I think you have successfully offset your Topeka dig with a Seaside props. Right.
Thank you, and again, Topekans, I apologize.
One interesting development to watch is Cul-De-Sac. This is the first car-free neighborhood built from scratch in the U.S., and it plans to open to the public in 2022 in Tempe. Cul-De-Sac aims to build 761 apartment-style buildings that also include a neighborhood grocery store, coffee shop, courtyard grills, and several restaurants within walking distance. I have to say, Jay, that sounds like where I live.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is all that innovative, but maybe because it's in a car-dominated city, Cul-de-sac aims to create enough gravitation pull to allow residents to accomplish all their basic needs without cars. And it's a city, but okay.
It's a little city. in a car-dominated one, but, perhaps a little micro city that'll expand and eventually overtake all of Tempe. Who knows?
Okay.
All right. So we meaning I promised 15 seconds, probably about 1 minute ago, but here we go. Our guest coming up is Rick Cole, who is the executive director of the Congress for the New Urbanism, which again is an organization that provides resources, education, and technical assistance to create socially just, economically robust, environmentally resilient, and people-centered places.
Rick has been recognized as one of America's Public Officials of the Year by Governing Magazine and one of the top 25 doers, dreamers, and drivers, not to be confused with diners, drivers, and drives, by Government Technology Magazine. He has won awards for Municipal Management Excellence from the American Society of Public Administrators and the Municipal Management Association of Southern California. The Los Angeles Times called him one of Southern California's most visionary planning thinkers. Jay, Rick is a good man. We very smart, and I think the listeners will enjoy hearing from him.
Off to our conversation with Guy Fieri. Rick Cole. So back to that brand we mentioned before called 4 Days. They've created something pretty revolutionary that they call a swap system. It was designed to help eliminate clothing waste, save water, and prevent CO2 emissions. Plus, it's super easy to use. How it works is you buy a product from them and do whatever you want to it. At any time, send it back to them in any condition, and you'll get an instant credit to use on new favorites. They close the loop and save resources by recycling, downcycling, and upcycling your old stuff. Plus, their clothing is recyclable and ethically made with organic cotton and non-toxic dyes. Plus, they purchase carbon offsets on your behalf with all orders over $35. When it comes to sustainable, zero-waste clothing, they check all the boxes and have some pretty cool new styles that just came in. Even better, Definers get 15% off their purchase with the code DEFINED15. That's DEFINED 15 at 4days, FORDAYS.com.
Here's a cool fact. 50% of consumers rely on their social network to help them make purchasing decisions. So let me ask you, how many more referrals and great leads would your business receive if all of your happy customers took the time to post their experiences and endorse your business on social media to all their connections? Well, I've got great news. Thumbs Up does just that. Thumbs Up is a referral system designed to help businesses leverage their customers' social media with almost no hassle. With Thumbs Up, you can create a personalized post for your customer, allowing them to celebrate their new purchase or service while endorsing your business to all their connections. Your post becomes their post, and then all their friends and family can see your hard work through your customers' eyes. Thumbs Up is offering Sustainability Defined listeners 50% off your first 2 months. Visit getathumbsup.com/sustainability, and the offer code will automatically be applied at checkout. Thumbs Up, referrals without asking.
All right, Definers, we are now joined by Rick Cole, the executive director for the Congress for the New Urbanism. We are extremely excited to be speaking with him about transit-oriented development today. So, Rick, thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be on.
Well, Rick, we'll dive right into it. We're really excited to tap into your experience here. You've held really an impressive number of influential roles with cities in Southern California, giving you a unique vantage point on TOD. You've served as the mayor of Pasadena, the city manager of Santa Monica, Ventura, and Azusa, and even the deputy mayor for budget and innovation in LA. So just to start us off, what have these roles taught you generally about creating healthy and dynamic cities?
That you have to build cities around people and not around cars. 70 years ago, we embarked upon a fundamental rethinking of how to build cities that was a departure from 5,000 years of learning how to build cities. And we had this idea that we could abandon all of the things that worked for people in different climates, in different social and economic conditions, and start over again from scratch. And there was actually a fantastic pavilion at the 1939 World's Fair, sponsored by General Motors, called Futurama, which showcased in diorama form this fantastic world we were all going to live in. We were going to live in suburban homes with nice yards and pools. We were going to drive on these wide open freeways to our jobs. Everything was going to be fantastic. And so we put literally trillions of dollars into investing into building Futurama. And it's not working from the social standpoint. It's not working from an economic standpoint. And it's not working from an environmental standpoint. And so that's what I've learned. We've got to go back to timeless principles of building cities, communities around people.
And perhaps we should go back to dioramas. I mean, has anyone thought about, today doing that exercise? That'd be kind of interesting.
Well, I think we've advanced past dioramas.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I'm not sure. But I think we will be talking today about some real life dioramas, because I actually should say that part of the power of Futurama, and by the way, 12.5 million Americans in 1939 went through Futurama. They stood for as long as 4 hours in line, and they got a button when they came out that said, "I have seen the future." And you can actually buy one on eBay these days. They're quite expensive. But there are 12.5 million people who came out of there with a personal visual experience.
So this Futurama, I mean, did you read about it and that's how you first got interested in transit-oriented development? Tell us that story of how you first learned about the concept.
Well, I grew up in Pasadena, which is a little bit of an exception in Southern California because much of it was built before World War II. Now, when I was growing up, much of that older fabric was economically depressed because investment was going to the new suburban fabric in our town that was built after World War II. Our old downtown was essentially abandoned, and people called it Skid Row, and they didn't want to go there. But we young people found it to be the place we wanted to be, and we were not alone. And pretty soon artists, and pretty soon investors, and pretty soon local businesses, and then ultimately chain businesses and restaurants, and pretty soon the oldest part of Pasadena was thriving again. And we were infilling in the parking lots where older buildings had been torn down to make room for parking. We were putting housing in. And I was part of that in my hometown. And then I discovered this whole history of the way in which America got on the bandwagon of driving everywhere instead of walking, biking, or taking the bus or taking the train. Pasadena, again, was built around the old red car system in Southern California. That's why we had a city. Our city was built around that. And then it was torn up again by our old friend General Motors, who bought up the train tracks all over the country and replaced them with their diesel buses. So I learned about that history, and it was fascinating history, and it made me into a new urbanist. We call ourselves new urbanists because while we have learned from the past, and the past is incredibly important, we live in 2021. We don't live in 1890. We don't live in 1940. So we have to build our cities with the technology and the materials that we have today. But we can, I think, as environmentally oriented folks, we recognize that there's some value in using materials that are sustainable.
Yeah, and you talk about the new urbanists, and I'm glad you defined that because we were going to ask you to do that because we know you're from the Congress for the New Urbanism. So can you talk a bit about that organization and what you all are trying to achieve?
Yeah, let me give you a quick sketch of our trajectory. Back in the early 90s, when I first got involved with New Urbanism, when it was a discovery to me, it was a radical challenge to the way America was building. A radical challenge that said basically, no, this is the wrong direction and it's going to run out of gas, literally and figuratively. And we had a big impact early on, well above the weight of our membership. Because we were right. And we weren't right because we were smarter than other people. We were right because we were paying closer attention than other people. We could see the implications when you build a 4-lane freeway, it's very cool and it's empty. And then it fills up, and so you build a 6-lane freeway, and then it fills up, and then you build an 8-lane freeway. And along at that point, you begin to wonder, where does this stop, right? If we keep building wider and wider freeways and they keep filling up, are we going to go to 24 lanes, which they actually have in Orange County? And so we were paying attention to the implications of what was happening in those days and predicting things like climate change and predicting that we would eventually run out of money to keep expanding our freeway. In fact, we're even running out of money to repair them, right? We're having to borrow trillions of dollars to maintain this infrastructure we've built. That's the definition of unsustainability. There was an economist named Herb Stein who said, things which are unsustainable have a tendency to come to a stop, which was too subtle for people to grasp. So he changed it to, things that can't go on forever don't. And so that's the essence of new urbanism. Is we thought that a lot of the direction in the early 90s was not going to continue. And so 30 years later, we're a movement of about 2,500 planners, builders, designers, elected officials, environmental activists, bike organization and supporters, people who want to revitalize their inner city neighborhoods. And our focus is on the architecture of community, which is the urban design piece of making cities work. We don't have a solution to every economic, social, and environmental problem, but we are very focused on the physical form of cities, the public realm especially, and recapturing community and communitarian values, which include stewarding our environment.
Mm-hmm. And Rick, I think this description you laid is fantastic. I also think it's about time to call out that you are credited as being one of the very first elected officials in the country to embrace this idea of new urbanism while you were the mayor of Pasadena. So for context, while there, you led an effort to rewrite the city's general plan to embrace timeless ways of building and target new human-scale development around the coming of light rail transit. So I think this situation itself touches on all these themes that we've been discussing thus far. Could you tell us about that process, about embracing new urbanism around the light rail, and what lessons did you take away from it?
Well, we've paid a colossal cost in building our cities around cars. Obviously, 40% of the carbon emissions in America come from our transportation system. The cost of paving over so much of our landscape and so much of our cities has been colossal. We're reliving and relearning the history of the way in which freeways were blasted through largely low-income neighborhoods populated largely by people of color in the 40s, 50s. And we're seeing, sprawl and the impact it's had on the environment and on habitat of species all over the planet. So all these things are coming clearer into focus. But back in the 90s, we just saw that this was unsustainable, and we need to recapture the rail transit upon which Pasadena had originally been founded. And we didn't have a transit line, right? We were advocating, voters in Los Angeles County had voted money to begin to build and to rebuild a transit network throughout Los Angeles. And now, 30 years later, we have over 100 miles of it, and it's working. But at the time, there was only one line, and it went from Long Beach to downtown Los Angeles. And it basically ran through empty areas, right? Because there was nothing there at the train stations. What we said is that we want to bring the train to Pasadena, but the only way it's going to serve people is if we build around those train stops. So we built our general plan really saying that what we'd like to do is to keep our lower density residential neighborhoods, not as exclusively single family, but bungalow courts, duplexes, small apartment buildings. But let's put the density right around these new train stations. So we had an old police station that we were replacing because it wasn't earthquake proof, and you don't want your police station to fall down in an earthquake.
Nope.
And it had a very old jail that we had bought from a town in the Midwest in 1895 and brought out on the train and
Whoa.
reassembled.
Must have been a cool jail.
Yeah.
They didn't make parts for the locks anymore.
Oh, geez.
So a great architect, Stephanos Palzois, who's now the Dean of Architecture at Notre Dame, as we say here in South Bend, he did the master plan, and he said, instead of tearing down that old police station, why don't you turn it into housing, and why don't you build housing around it, and why don't you build over the train tracks, because those are the train tracks that ultimately are going to be the light rail that's going to serve your city. And that'll connect it to the park next door, which will make it a very nice place to live, to be able to look out your balcony or your window to this wonderful downtown green space. And we bought that idea. We said, that's a fantastic idea. Now we just need the train. So we built the first transit-oriented development in Southern California in 75 years because we were building the first transit in California in 75 years. It was 325 units of apartments, both the old police building into beautiful lofts and then new apartments. 20% were set aside for low-income folks because we wanted to be sure those are folks who use transit, and we wanted to have a mixed income community. On the ground floor, because it's in the old part that was revitalizing, we put 12,000 square foot of retail, which has continued to do well in the 30 years since it was built. And ultimately, the train arrived, and it's the Memorial Park train station. It's the heart of transit portal for the very popular Old Pasadena revitalized historic core of our city. And right in the middle of it is a light rail transit stop, which goes east to Azusa and ultimately to Ontario, which for folks who don't know Los Angeles geography is 30 miles to the east. And then goes directly to downtown Los Angeles, where it branches off. You can go to Long Beach, you can go to Santa Monica, you can go to Hollywood. We're now connected to all of Southern California. It was from that very basic idea that we should put people around transit, put uses around transit that transforms the potential for transit. Because the reality is, if you build around cars and then you try to get people to ride the train or ride the bus, they can't. When they get off the bus or when they get off the train, there's that first mile, last mile problem, which is, okay, you're left at the train station or the bus station or the bus stop, but nothing's around there. So you have to build around transit to make it work.
Rick, that's a fabulously visual example you walked us through. And I think it just speaks to the components of what we would call a thriving place being everything from, what developers and planners called mixed use, right? The example you gave had housing, it had retail, and it had parks as well as transit. So, this topic is transit-oriented development. So it is by no means just, as you're referencing a train track and a stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. You make this sound so not only ideal, but also kind of easy. It's like, duh, of course, that's what we should be doing. But then at the same time, we haven't seen a huge uptake, right, of transit-oriented. I mean, we've seen quite a bit of uptake, but we still have the 24-lane highway and stuff that we were talking about. So how can we provide the tools so that these auto-centric cities can make the kind of transition you were talking about? How do we incentivize it and not do it in a way where maybe there's unintended consequences or it doesn't lead to the kind of uptake we want?
There are absolutely things you can do today as we await the larger, movement in which the flock turns on a dime and flies in a different direction. The most important thing, which is actually is happening at scale in Los Angeles, they've passed a law called the Transit-Oriented Community, and they call them TOC developments.
Okay.
And TOC developments are around transit stops. They've redrawn the zoning, right? They've said, look, it doesn't make any sense to have it zoned the way it used to be now that we have put this multi-billion-dollar investment in transit. So within, a half a mile of a transit station, you can build a different form and density than you used to be able to build, and the process is much simpler. But you have to build in affordable housing, and you have to pay prevailing wages. So there's a social benefit. And so the first thing you need to do is rezone. In rezone, that makes the design an integral part of it. The worst thing you can do is put a giant building that you would put next to a freeway and a parking lot and dump that next to a transit stop, because the kind of architecture that you build for a parking lot is very different from the kind of architecture you build for people coming and going on train. Are there other things you can do? Absolutely. And again, transit agencies are beginning to move in this direction of becoming entrepreneurial. Right now, transit agencies rely upon tax money and upon fares. And neither of those are particularly progressive ways of supporting transit. Henry Huntington, 100 years ago when he built the red cars, he supported transit through real estate development. So it's taking those parking lots around transit stops and converting them and capturing the value, the economic value. And so transit agencies are beginning to do that. They're beginning to go into joint venture public-private partnerships. They get the revenue from the new development that comes in. It's designed to be to support transit and to support transit usage, and it makes money that can then expand the quality, the safety, and the frequency of the transit. So if the transit agency is getting $1 million worth of revenue from the surrounding uses at a transit stop, they can put that into keeping the transit station clean.
Sure.
They can put it into better security. They can put it into nicer amenities. So those are two very tried and true ways in which cities can promote transit-oriented development. On the one side, zoning for it. On the other side, actually entering into partnerships to do that development and generate revenue that goes back into improving the transit system.
Rick, I think those are two fantastic and well-defined routes to lay in front of other cities or listeners that are thinking about this kind of stuff. It's almost as if you have, a legal approach.
He's laying the tracks, Jay.
Oh, mwah, beautiful. Laying the legal tracks in the form of zoning or upzoning, as we referenced in our intro. And then on the other side, you have this financial piece of kind of market-oriented partnerships with other groups in order to incentivize it from a financial standpoint. Rick, I've got a question for you about this idea of upzoning, and it's something that I'm sure many planners or developers have come across as well, which is this idea of NIMBYism, which stands for not in my backyard and references folks that perhaps live in areas that have lower density, let's say around a transit stop. The city wants to come in with, as we're discussing, very pure intentions of wanting to make these areas around transit stops a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more thriving, and they see the way to do that by upzoning, what is perhaps a single family neighborhood around that. Now, NIMBYism has its name for a reason, because it's a common reaction to this stuff as far as resident pushback, because they might like the way things are. Do you have any examples or ideas as to how cities and other folks interested in upzoning can address that?
My grandmother taught me early on a place for everything and everything in its place, Ricky. That's what new urbanism is. It's not a 6-story apartment building next to your 1-story home, right? It's a duplex next to your 1-story home, and it's a 6-story building next to a transit station, right? So there's ways in which everything needs to be in its place. That doesn't mean that developers get to build whatever they want, wherever they want, whenever they want. The public has a role in actually framing good planning and making sure that the transition from the current status quo to a more humanistic version of Futurama, that can take place and that people are not thrown out of their homes, displaced, and suffer the kind of downside that people fear. So I think we have to address legitimate concerns and talk about, let's do good planning. Let's make sure that in this new community that we're going to transition toward, that's a 15-minute city, that in fact there's going to be park space, there's going to be a local community school that your kids can walk to and instead of having to be driven to. Let's not just paint a picture of an ideal world that's never going to happen. Let's actually engage you in figuring out how to do this and your part in having to do this. And that's how we did it in Pasadena, right? When I talked to the planners, they said, I told them, look, we have to have thousands of people involved in the process of a new general plan. We get people around tables. We lower the volume. We don't tell them they have 3 minutes to talk. We give them an hour and a half to talk with each other. We dialogue. We capture the common ground. We identify the issues that need to be solved. We work on those things. That's different than, a public hearing where people scream at each other. So we got thousands of people involved. We put them around tables. We listened to them. They listened to each other, and they came up with a plan that 30 years later is still the direction of the city, and that actually has worked. So I think part of it is not just, telling people, you're wrong, you're a racist, you're afraid of change, you're standing in the way of progress. That's not a very convincing argument to most people. But if you say, look, the planet's burning, our community is racially segregated, you're spending too much time in the car commuting and driving your kids to soccer practice and this and that and the other thing. There's got to be a better way. Let's sit down and work this out. There's going to be some compromises. There's going to be some trade-offs, but we're also going to look for win-wins. Then you defang some of this polarization, and you begin to get to places where people can actually productively work together. Again, we call ourselves the proponents of the architecture of community, and the community part is important. It's a Latin word, right? It means coming together.
Love it. All right, so Rick, we've been discussing directly and even indirectly this idea of equity, and it's something we're trying to do a better job of incorporating into our conversations. And so I'd love to bring that up here. In fact, we saw a quote from you, which read, CNU, or Congress for the New Urbanism, is fighting to legalize walkable urbanism, support complete neighborhoods, and design for climate change. We will take this urgent message to places that have too long been bypassed, whether inner city neighborhoods ravaged by institutional racism, Rust Belt towns abandoned by disinvestment, or rural communities struggling with poverty. So my question for you is how you view transit-oriented development as a way to address racism in our communities, and if you have any specific examples that you can cite as promising paths forward.
The transit system brings all but the extraordinarily wealthy into contact. Just like in Paris or Tokyo, everybody uses it because it's the best way to get around. Sure. The really wealthy have their limousines and their helicopters, but the vast majority of people from the poorest to the upper middle class, they don't mind. It's the way to get around. And not only is it the way to get around and you're riding with people from different backgrounds, but it also brings those people into closer proximity to where they live closer to each other, to where they work closer to each other, to the public spaces that they share. So, again, New York is not, everybody doesn't want to live in New York, and I'm not suggesting that every town or rural community look like New York or have a subway system. But it is to say that building transit-oriented development at scale in Phoenix, in Dallas, in Seattle, in Portland, in Miami, in Atlanta, in Detroit. This is a way of actually addressing equity in a way that has tremendous transformative impacts across the board.
Got it. Okay. And Rick, so let's move to our final question here. So let's say that we're at a party. I'm sure there's some event space over some busy train stop that is doing a good job of being where people can easily get to it from public transportation. And we're at this party, and we want to explain to someone transit-oriented development. And we kind of want to get their attention really quickly, give them some stat to have them maybe even drop their drink. Who knows? What would be that one stat that you would point to for transit-oriented development that we could throw out at this party as our party fact?
Going by transit is 20 times more efficient in terms of the use of space as the private automobile. America needs to get on board the train again.
And first of all, I love the stat, but then also we have done high-speed rail, and I'm totally with you. I was just in Italy, and it was great to travel around on high speed. So, Jay, I think that does it. So, Rick, thanks again for your time and lending us some of your expertise and telling us some of your amazing experience. We appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks for letting me be part of this much larger dialogue. We don't have all the answers. We partner and collaborate with people of like mind, but we're part of a much broader movement to make cities that are vibrant, cities that are livable, cities that are equitable, and most of all, cities that are sustainable. The great cities of the world have been around not dozens of years, not hundreds of years. They've been around thousands of years. That's resilience.
I love it.
Agreed. Thanks so much, Rick.
Thanks, Rick. All right, Scott, we've been talking a lot about toads this episode. I think with this last joke, we've effectively killed it and the episode with it. So I think it's time we wrap it up.
We killed the joke, but not toads. No toads were harmed in the production of this episode.
That's an important clarification. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So some typical thanks is we want to thank Square Peg Round Hole and Potions for the music we used in this episode. We want to thank Amelia Kovac, who did a lot of research for this episode. So, Jay, if people liked the stuff in this, I mean, I know, Jay, you did some stuff too, but Amelia really did some heavy lifting.
Absolutely.
We also want to thank Keaton Butler, who expertly edited this episode per usual. We want to encourage you all, please, take some time, quick break, rate, review, and subscribe. And the nice thing is, Jay, when people review the podcast, we can say your name because we read one review every episode. And Jay, we went to the reviews this time. And first of all, we noticed that the review we read last time, it has a different name now. So this time, now we're looking at it, and it says Jack/IE and they, them. So not sure if it was the person we said before or Jack/IE, but whoever it is, we want to give appropriate thank you on that front. But Jay, we had to go to the archives because no one left a new review.
That's right. Scott, I feel like this is one of the very few reviews I've read. So this is an oldie, but I'm pumped.
I think you can do it, Jay.
Okay, here we go. This one comes from Davina Ist. I think it's an IST.
Sure.
From June of 2019, aged beautifully. It is titled Best Podcast. This is an incredible podcast with the website adding a great visual resource. It gives just the right amount of information to digest per topic and allows you to take action on each topic. Absolutely love this. Davina, we absolutely love you.
Davina. Shouldn't have.
How did I do, Scott?
That was pretty good. Although you got to do it like, I always say the name like that. Like, Davina.
Well, that's your thing. I'm not trying.
You can do it. Anyway.
Davina.
Yeah. Okay. And the last thing we'll say, for those of you that have stuck around, which we appreciate you doing that, we want to give a teaser for the next episode. It's going to be on sea level rise. So really important topic. And we've got the person we're interviewing is a friend of mine, has written books on the subject. He's just so clear and eloquent on this. I think people really like it. So tune in next month. And with that, Jay, I think that about does it. You all stay sustainable out there. I'm Scott Breen.
And I'm Jay Siegel. We will see you next time.